Hello everybody, Lance here, and in this tutorial I will show you how you can create this paint material using Blender 2.81. And with this paint material you have some controls such as the amount of paint you want to have in your material, and the spread of the bumpiness around the edge of the paint. And you also have the master scale controller to control the size of the pen, the details. Okay, let's set that back to 1. And since in the last video you learned about the space warping technique, we will also use that technique in this tutorial to add more details to the paint. So this is without the space warp technique, and this is with the space warp technique. Okay, so with no further ado, let's get started. Okay, so this is the scene, which is just a sphere with a light, and that's it. And for this tutorial we will use Cycle's render engine, because the EV engine currently has a bug that messed up the bump map when there are more than 3 noise textures being used in in the material. Until they fix the bug for EV, unfortunately this texture will only work for Cycles. Okay, and this will be our paint material, and copy this principal shader to create our base material. So this is the base. You can make it a metal base or wood base or whatever. For this tutorial we will not care about the base shader. Okay, we will only care about the paint layer. Okay, so mix these together like so. And for the base, let's set this to something like this, and reduce the specular, increase the roughness a bit. And for the paint, let's just set it to something blue, and decrease the specular a bit and increase the roughness just a bit. There we go. Okay, so this is where we start. So let's first create the space warp node. Okay, so create a texture coordinate node, and we will use the generated texture coordinate, but you can use object, or you can even use the geometry and use the position output over here. But for this tutorial we will stick with the generated. Okay, so create a noise texture, there we go, and hook up the generated texture coordinate and change this one to 4D. Now the 4D texture allows us to randomize the texture using the W dimension. Okay, so this will be our base noise that we will use to warp the space. Okay, create a vector math node and change this one to subtract, and set all the 3 values down here to 0.5. There we go. And copy this node and change the operation to multiply or scale. These are pretty much identical. So create a value node and connect this to the vector, the second input. You can use the scale if you want. Okay, so next let's copy this one and change the operation to add, and add this with the original texture coordinate. There we go. Now this is the warped space, and let's, for the sake of it, create a checker texture to see what's going on, and connect this to the vector input of the checker pattern. So here we can see that the effect of the warp, and we can change this value to something lower like so, to have a weaker warp. Now, however, if we change the scale of the texture, you can see the warp become much more stronger in compare with in relative to the scale. Okay, so I want the strength of the warp to be weaker if the texture is smaller. Okay, so the way we do it is to create a another input value. Okay, and put this in the scale. Okay, and let's set this to something like 10 and create a math node, change the operation to divide, and divide by the scale. So a higher scale value will result in a weaker warp strength. Okay, so I can increase the warp strength to something like this, and now I can increase the scale. And you can see as I increase the scale to something stronger, you can see that the warp strength become weaker. Okay, so this is our warp node. It's time to group everything into a single node. Okay, so select everything, leave the values and the input node. Group these lines together and select these reroute node as well. Okay, select everything from this reroute node to these reroute node, and Control G to group everything. Now, naturally, the order of the input is messed up, so we need to fix the order. Okay, the input go over here, and this should be the scale. For some reason, Blender create 4 input while there should be only these 2 are not necessary. Let's get rid of that and go in. And I think we messed up something. Let's go ahead and get rid of this scale. There we go. And this one is scale, and this one is strength. A typo here. There we go. Now let's go back out and test our result. Increase the strength and increase the scale. There we go. Everything seems to be working properly. Okay, now go back in and connect the settings for the noise to the output. There we go. And maybe lower the scale down below the W value. There we go. And change this input to vector. There we go. And rename this group to space warp. There we go. Now we have a space warp node, and we can use this node to do a lot of things. Alright, so let's create another noise texture, the second noise texture, and change this one to 4D as well. So this space warp will destroy the space, and we will use that destroyed space to create another noise texture. Okay, so this is our noise texture. Let's randomize it a little, and maybe lower the scale value here, and change the strength to maybe 5. Let's increase the details to 4. I think the distortion is a little too much, so maybe, or maybe not. Yeah, maybe it's too much. Set this down to maybe 4. Alright, we will come back to tweak this node later. Okay, so now let's create a color ramp node to see what's going on. we can increase the black and decrease the, move the black key to the right and move the right key to the left to the center like this to see what's going on. And right now we don't have any way to control the color ramp using inputs, so we will not use the color ramp, but we will use something different. Okay, the color ramp node is only for viewing purpose. So get rid of the color ramp and create a map range node. Connect the factor to the value of the map range. And if we increase this to 0.45 and the max value to 0.55, we will have something similar to the color ramp node. Okay, but now we have this input to control. Okay, so create a value node, name this one amount. Okay, and copy this node and call it spread. Okay, and I want when the amount is set to 0, the output of this node should be pitch black. And when I set the value input to 1, this should output a white value. Okay, set this one to something like 0.05. Okay, and create another math node, set the operation to divide, and divide this value by 2, and copy this math node 2 times. This one is add, this one is subtract, and this one is add. Okay, so this one subtract like so, and connect this input like so, and connect this to the min value and connect this to the max value. Okay, now if I set this to something lower, you can see that we can now control the amount of paint we want to have. Okay, and the spread will basically control the transition between white and black. There we go. If we set the spread to something small, we have a very sharp transition, and if we have a larger spread, we have a bigger transition. Okay, so set this one to 0.05. Okay, now this input is not what I actually want. I want the number 1 to give me white, and I want the number 0 to give me black. Okay, so I need to invert this value. So I can copy this math node and keep the subtract operation, connect the value and the amount value to the second input, and set the first input to 1. This will be the equivalent of the invert node, but this invert node basically calculate the same math 3 times for three channels, and we will basically run a bunch of math operations for nothing. So this is a faster, more efficient way of inverting a value. Okay, so now when I set this value to 1, I get white, and when I set to 0, I get black, and when I set to 0.5, we get something like this. Okay, so this is what the noise looks like without the space warp. And it doesn't matter how much you try to increase the details, it will never be as good as the warped space. There we go. We have a much better looking randomness. So set this down to 2, and yeah. Alright, now we almost have the mask to control the paint. And we can put this in the factor to mix the 2 shader, and this is what we have right now. Okay, maybe lower the roughness of the paint a little, like so. And right now you can see that the transition between the base and the paint is very smooth, and I don't want this to be smooth. I want the paint and the base to have an absolutely sharp transition. Okay, so I will copy this math node and change the operation to greater than, and set the second value to 0. So any value greater than 0 will become 1, and any value that is 0 or lower will be black. And we can now use this as a mask to control where our paint will be. So connect this to the mixed shader, and this is how the paint look. Alright, now we can go ahead and create our bump. Okay, so we can invert this output value using the same technique as before. Change this to subtract and set the first value to 1, and we can use this as the bump map for the paint. Okay, so let's create a maybe not the bump, just use the displacement, so that we don't have to connect the bump to the normal of both shader. Okay, so connect this to the height and set the scale to something lower, maybe 0.01 for now, and connect this to the displacement. Alright, and I think the displacement is too strong. Maybe set this one to 0.5. Yeah, this is better. Okay, now the peeling of the paint is unrealistic, and I find it more realistic to just add a curve and lower the middle point like so. This will give us a much more believable peeling effect. Okay, let's increase this to 0.1 to have a further peel. Okay, so we're almost there. Alright, now it is time to start tweaking our values to get to make a believable looking paint, because the node setup is one thing, the actual input values, the tweaking is another, and these are equally important. Okay, so maybe set this one to 3.5, and maybe change the W a little. And change the scale to maybe 20. Better. This looks much better. And maybe increase the details a little. Yeah, that's better. And next, let's set the values for the noise. Maybe, yeah, just leave everything as default except for the details. Okay. Alright. Now the bump looks nice and old, but you can see that the edge of the paint is too sharp. This is absolutely sharp, and I want to have some round looking bump at the edge of the paint. So in order to do that, I simply multiply the mask with the bump. Okay, so just multiply the mask with the bump like so, and connect it to the RGB curve, and you can see we now have a very thin highlight along the edge of the bump, the paint. Okay, now this is basically it. The next thing to do is to create some color variation for the paint. Okay, so we will duplicate the space warp node to warp the space differently, and copy the noise texture over here like so. Okay, so this noise texture will decide the color of the paint. So maybe increase the strength a little, and maybe change the scale a little bit, and change the W as well. Okay, now we have the noise looks like this, and maybe increase the scale of the noise and decrease the strength maybe. Yeah, this will do. Alright, now we need to increase the contrast of this noise a little. So increase the black to, move the black to the right and move the white to the left, like so. This will increase the contrast of the noise. Now we can use this to control the roughness as well as the color for the paint. So let's set the roughness first. Create a mix create a mix RGB node and connect this color ramp to the factor, okay, and create two value input. Okay, this one is min rough and this one is max rough. There we go. And connect to the two color inputs. And for the minimum roughness, let's set to something like 0.2, and the maximum roughness should be around 0.6. And we can now connect this to the roughness input of the paint layer, and let's see what's going on. It's kinda hard to see, so maybe set this to 0.1. Now we start to see something here. Okay, maybe decrease the scale a little to make the details a little bigger. There we go, we have some color variation. And next, let's set the color for the paint. So create a RGB curve node and connect this one to the factor, and this should be the color of the paint. So place your mouse cursor over this color and Control C to copy the color, and place your mouse cursor over here and Control V to paste the color, and decrease the brightness of the color a little, like so, and connect this to the color input of the paint. There we go, we now have something like this. And I actually need to invert this color, so the glossier area should be darker, but right now the glossier area are actually brighter. So I need to invert this output before putting it inside the RGB curve node. Okay, so just copy this and change the input. There we go. The paint is basically done, but it's quite inconvenient to use this texture this way. So for example, if I want everything to be uniformly bigger or smaller, how do I come about doing just that? So right now you have to go in and change the scale of all the four noises. Pretty inconvenient. Okay, so we need to scale the texture coordinate before using that texture coordinate to generate the texture. Okay, so create a mapping node. There we go, and create an input value node and connect this value to the scale. Now this will be our master scale. There we go. Now there is one problem with the master scale, because if I increase the scale to something higher, you can see that the bump is too much. So I want the bump to be weaker if the scale is higher. Okay, so I need to somehow invert this scale value to decide the bump. Okay, so create another input node and call this bump. There we go, and create a math node like so, and divide the bump by the master scale. There we go, and move this node over here and connect it to the scale. There we go, and now it's just the matter of tweaking this input, or maybe we don't even need that input, just tweak it right here. Set this to maybe 0.1, 0.01. Yeah, this one will do. So if I change this to 1, you can see that the scale of, the scale of the bump is relative to the size of the details. Okay, so I can increase the scale to something very high and go in, and I can still see that the bump remain consistent. but it looks like I can't zoom in anymore. So yeah, this is a too small scale. Set this one to 10. So yeah, you can see the bump is consistent with the size of the details. The next inconvenience that I find in this texture is that this slider is too strong, and I just slide it a little, and you can see that the paint completely covered the entire object. So I want this slider to be a little bit weaker. So copy this math node and change the operation to divide, and divide this number by 100, and do the same for the spread. Okay, so I can slide this all the way to maybe 100, maybe like so. So it's much more precise to control the paint this way. Okay, and the same thing for the spread. And maybe increase the spread some more. Alright. Alright, so this is the paint material that we have so far. There is no base just yet, which is a topic for another day. For now, this is our paint material. And again, this only works for cycles for now because of a bug in Eevee. So let's switch to Eevee to see what's going on. Alright, so this is the bug with the Eevee render engine. I already reported the bug and it is already confirmed, but I'm not sure when they are gonna fix it. But for now, you have to use this with cycles, okay? Okay, that's all I have for today. I hope you enjoy it, and I'll see you next time.